Hi, I'm Diane Macedo. Today on ABC News Live, President Biden is warning of potential nuclear Armageddon.
We begin tonight with those words from President Biden behind closed doors, but they made immediate news. The president warning the risk of nuclear Armageddon has not been this high since the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Tonight, President Biden's stark warning of the growing nuclear threat from Vladimir Putin. The president saying the risk of nuclear Armageddon is the highest it's been in 60 years since the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Good evening. I'm Deirdre Bolton in for Lindsay Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us. We begin tonight with President Biden and a stark warning about the potential for nuclear war. Speaking at a fundraiser here in New York City, President Biden said the threat of a nuclear weapon being deployed has not been this serious since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Quote, "We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy."
The world has not been this close to nuclear Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis more than half a century ago. That is the quite startling warning from President Biden.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm John Dickerson in for Nora. Tonight, President Biden warns the world that we are closer to a nuclear conflict than at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962.
We have some breaking news tonight. At a fundraiser in New York this evening, President Biden just made some extraordinary and highly alarming comments about Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine and the threat of nuclear war. Biden said the risk of nuclear Armageddon is at the highest level since 1962.
क्या पुतिन को सिकंदर बंद दुनिया जीतनी? क्या पुतिन विश्व विजेता बनना चाहते हैं? द न्यूयॉर्क टाइम्स की एक रिपोर्ट के मुताबिक दुनिया के मशहूर युद्ध विश्लेषकों का मानना है कि पुतिन की सेना किसी भी पारंपरिक युद्ध को कैसे परमाणु युद्ध में बदला जा सकता है। ब्रिटेन की नई प्रधानमंत्री बनी लिज ट्रस का आजकल सबसे बड़ा शौक है पुतिन के खिलाफ नए नए बयान जारी करना, पुतिन को नीचा दिखाना।
Ukraine can win, Ukraine must win, and Ukraine will win.
पुतिन के बर्थडे से पहले इस तरह के बयान जारी किए जा रहे हैं ताकि पुतिन तनाव में रहें। फ्रांस के राष्ट्रपति पुतिन के खिलाफ तोप भेज रहे हैं। लिज ट्रस पुतिन के हारने की दुआएं मांग रही हैं। अमेरिका के राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन पुतिन को चेतावनी दे रहे हैं। इतने पर भी अमेरिका और ब्रिटेन को चैन नहीं आ रहा है।
And just to sort of add a complicating factor, our ally, the president of Ukraine, just asked the United States to preemptively bomb Russia's nuclear arsenal.
What should NATO do? Make it impossible for Russia to use nuclear weapons. We need preemptive strikes so that they know what will happen to them if they use them.
Well, that's kind of crazy. No wonder the Russians are just a little bit frisky.
Today, both the White House and the State Department seem to downplay President Biden's remarks, insisting there is no imminent threat and the U.S. posture has not changed.
I'm told that the White House sees no indication that Putin is preparing to use nuclear weapons imminently.
Today, the White House made it clear that the United States has not seen any new intelligence to indicate there is an imminent threat of Russia using nukes.
But now the White House is obviously, I'm sure there are going to be some calls from allies and wondering what the president might have been referring to at this point. And so it's going to be creating a difficult day for the NSC, for the White House press secretary, in terms of explaining what the president might have been talking about here.
As you pointed out, Shep, U.S. intelligence has not detected anything that suggests that Putin is even preparing for such a contingency. So I think we need to be a little bit calmer and not get panicked here.
Well, everyone I hear from, you included tonight, is very calm. Everyone except the president, who's using this particular rhetoric. And you say, well, but we need to be on guard. We need to be on guard from what? I mean, I really just don't understand what it was about last night and what was different last night than the day before or the day before that.
The White House advised there is no new information that Russia is planning an imminent nuclear attack on Ukraine.
It will go for other nations.
Warning a conflict in his region could easily become global. In the United States, Ashley Mullaney, 7 News.
President Biden ignored questions on his way to a speech in Maryland this morning after warning in stark terms of possible nuclear annihilation.
White House officials insist the president's remarks are not based on new information. Consistent messaging, they say, or loose language. Either way, the backdrop now isn't a 1960s Cold War, but a real one in Europe, where calculations are hasty and miscalculations very possible.
Deirdre, it really is worth repeating again. As for this nuclear threat, multiple U.S. officials are telling us right now that they've seen no change in Russia's nuclear posture, and therefore the U.S. government is not changing its either.
What is your sense there on the ground as to how worried the Ukrainian government are, the troops are, the people are about that?
Look, they've had a long time to ponder this. It's been a nuclear threat, a possibility that has been mentioned by Vladimir Putin since, frankly, day one of the invasion that he launched on the 24th of February. So there was a suggestion yesterday that President Zelensky would like the Americans to demonstrate that now rather than wait until afterwards. But I think we're still dealing with something that most people think is theoretical rather than actual.
Tell us what has been the reaction there to Biden's remarks.
Yeah, there's been a lot of briefing this morning, Kathy, that there's been no extra intelligence, no particular change in Russia's posture to bring this remark out all of a sudden, out of the blue. And the reason it's set all sorts of hairs running, of course, is because the word Armageddon suggests an American nuclear response to a Russian nuclear attack. And that's something that all the briefing over the entire course of this conflict has actually been in the other direction, which is that America would never respond with nuclear weapons, even if Putin did launch, say, tactical battlefield weapons, which is the most likely scenario that we're talking about here. So that's why it's particularly disturbing. I can only emphasize that the briefing this morning is that there's no particular evidence that's led to this remark.
David Charter, US editor of The Times, thank you very much for joining us from Washington there.
Our world is suddenly obsessed with a 20th century question. Will there be a nuclear war? Let's face it, it's a threat that most of us are aware of but rarely pay attention to. And there is a reason for that. Nobody in their right mind would actually use a nuclear weapon. At least that was the assumption. For anyone wondering, Armageddon is basically the end of the world, a nuclear winter. Why is Biden making such a dire prediction?
A midterm election is coming, and voter concern about stability and continuity in times of crisis might emerge as an issue.
Today, he ignored reporters asking that he clear things up and quite literally jogged to Marine One and then headed out to events celebrating the Inflation Reduction Act. Again, are we near Armageddon or not? This is when it matters. This is when what the president says, when every word is truly important. Yet his administration can't seem to get on the same page. Contrast what you just heard from the president last night, Armageddon, with his spokeswoman, the State Department spokeswoman, and his defense secretary this week.
We have not seen any reason to adjust our own nuclear posture.
And nor do we have any indication that Russia is preparing to imminently use nuclear weapons.
I don't see anything right now that would lead me to believe that he has made such a decision.
The last one's a little interesting, since Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, would authenticate any decision to launch America's nuclear weapons. Again, which is it? Are we near Armageddon or not?